calling the meeting to order. We need to go with a roll call. So should I do the roll call, or do we have a brave volunteer to do it?
You ready?
Yes.
Michael Calcho.
Here.
Michael Chernow.
Here.
Eric.
Here.
Katia. No. Rebecca. Here. Robin. Here. Dimitri.
Here.
Secretary.
Here.
Nancy.
Yes, here.
Matt.
Here.
Bella. You're remote.
Here.
Here.
Very good. Thank you for that. Thank you for those of you who are here both in person and online. I must say that the world that I live in is in stark contrast to the beauty of the day outside today. So at least I can compensate and hopefully achieve homeostasis. So the first item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the board meeting on February 12th. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved. Second.
Thank you, and we'll call for the vote, and we will also have to do a roll call, I believe.
Michael Calcho.
Yes.
Michael Chernow.
Yes.
Bella.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
Rebecca. Yes. Robin. Yes. Dimitri.
Yes.
Secretary.
Yes.
Nancy.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Thank you.
The motion carries. The next item on the agenda is the executive director's report.
All right. Thank you, Secretary, and good morning, everyone. It's great to see you all. It's great to be in person. And Bella, have you with us as well. It has been a very busy spring since we last convened back in February, and I'm looking forward to sharing a few brief updates on our team's areas of focus this spring before previewing some of the specific agenda items we're bringing before you today. As the board knows, we are in part 2 of a multi-year 2-part upgrade to our customer-facing service platforms. Having recently completed a successful transition to a new contact center vendor that is consistently delivering strong service efficiently, compassionately, and responsibly to the people that we are here to serve. Thank you to our tireless internal customer service ops teams and our partners at AHS for this success. With that successful transition behind us, we are now squarely focused on the transition of our enrollment and premium billing service function to our new vendor partner, Maximus. Getting this highly complex transition right so that we land on higher ground is time-consuming, arduous, and demanding. It has required our teams to do work in new ways so that we get the outcome we want and that our enrollees deserve. I am deeply appreciative of our staff who are grinding through it, knowing our work, sweating every detail, and holding our outgoing and incoming vendors to the highest standards of accountability will mean better service for our enrollees and a higher performing Health Connector. Looking federally, we continue to take stock of the impacts of federal policy changes coming from DC, the first of which Health Connector and the people we serve in January during open enrollment. All told, changes from DC, the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or OB3, and Congress's inaction to extend enhanced premium tax credits resulted in a 7% contraction of our enrollment. The dust continues to settle as we work to better understand who left our coverage and where they went. We will continue to keep the board and the public posted, and we are working to prepare for the next round of OB3's impacts that will hit in 2027 and 2028. We are, like our colleagues at Mass Health, focused on using every single tool available to us and partnering with our healthcare community stakeholders to try to hold the line on coverage and access in every instance possible, while also supporting exploration of more structural, holistic, responsive options in the Commonwealth that the Commonwealth can consider in the face of these historic federal cuts and setbacks to our coverage landscape. Of note, one of the major changes impacting open enrollment for 2027 coverage will be new federally imposed restrictions on the length and timing of states' open enrollment periods. Because federal rules will preclude us from extending open enrollment into January, we are planning to open our OE doors earlier this year, preparing for an open enrollment period this fall that will run from October 23rd to December 23rd. So as we get closer to the fall, we look forward to keeping the board posted on our extensive outreach and education plans to help members and applicants in the public be aware of the significant shift in the timing of our open enrollment period. Turning to today's agenda, we're coming to the board this morning with 4 business items. The first two items relate to our policy responsibilities regarding the state's individual mandate. Staff will ask you for your final votes for the regulatory updates you approved to move to the respective public comment periods back in February. The first item is a request for your final approval on the affordability schedule for 2027, identical to the change that you approved for public comment at the February board meeting. The second is a definitional update to minimum creditable coverage standards that intends to hold the line on our mandate's expectation about the availability of science-based preventive services during a time when such standards at the federal level have become less stable and reliable. We appreciated the board's support for this update in February and returned to you with a request for your final vote on the identical change you approved at that meeting. The latter portion of today's meeting is a dyad of more strategy-focused topics for the Health Connector, on which we'll seek your input, discussion, and guidance. I'll share a bit of context on those items as we arrive at that part of the agenda. We look forward to sharing information with you about our strategies for continuing to build the most forward-looking, future-proofed, resilient, and organizationally mature Health Connector possible across all aspects of our enterprise, including the way we think about technology and how we advance towards our long-term strategic goals in an increasingly dynamic landscape. Before I wrap up, I want to thank all of you who were able to join us at Faneuil Hall last month for the 20th anniversary of Chapter 58 and the creation of the Health Connector. We sincerely appreciated the overwhelming support for the cause of this organization and all of you and so many partners carry that was set in motion 20 years ago and remains as vital as ever today. I personally found the tremendous pride, commitment, and resolve that was in the air at the gathering as we celebrated the distance traveled to be both deeply touching and also serve as a powerful reminder of what a gift the creation of this innovation-oriented organization was, how much trust was placed in the stewards of it, and the responsibility, therefore, we all have to keep evolving it, pushing it, and shaping it to be the most impactful version possible of itself. Our insistence on holding ourselves to the highest standards of public excellence, on not accepting the status quo, and on putting the public's needs at the center of everything we do is the way we honor the work done to pass Chapter 58 20 years ago. That perspective fuels the forward-looking strategic work we'll discuss in the latter part of the meeting today. I thank this board for their support and their guidance as we continue to challenge ourselves to reach for the next rung and write the story that will shape where we are 20 years from now. So with that, I will hand it back to our board chair, Secretary Mahania.
Thank you, Audrey. Yes, I was remiss in not commenting on the beautiful event that we had at the Faneuil Hall. For me, it was great because I got to take a picture with 3 other secretaries. There were 3 other past health secretaries, so that was like a cute moment. But yeah, I think you and your team did an amazing job. It was really a great event, and I think everybody really. Selfishly, I think it helped me a great deal. As you know, we are working both on a primary care task force and an affordability task force, and I think that reminding folks of just how people have tackled issues in the past, I think gave us momentum to really seriously redouble our efforts to try to achieve agreement. Any questions, comments for Audrey from the
I
board?
would say it was great. It was beautiful. It was really nice. I was saying to Nancy yesterday, just shows you we can do hard things. I think someone probably said it that day, but.
Yeah. That is the message. Well, I appreciate it very much. Thank you. It was a ton of work from the team and a lot of partners, including Nancy and Commissioner Caljo, who were in my a secret planning group we had as we got ready for it. So it was a labor of love from a lot of people who just care so much about the law and the Health Connector. So I'm glad it landed where it did. And just while we have a moment, want to welcome Katia, who's a new member of our board, representing administration and finance. So great to have you. Thank you for being a part of our board. And
There was a coup, you eliminated Dana.
We unfortunately lost Dana. Yeah, she's at Mass Health now. So still serving.
Still doing good. From one fire into another.
Yeah.
Did we tell Katya about the hazing ritual?
She rocked
Singing
the
college songs loud in the first board meeting?
Oh, yeah.
Karaoke, but. The next item on the agenda is a presentation on the final affordability schedule for 2027, which will include a vote and will be presented by Kayla.
Thank you. Good morning, Secretary and members of the board. Sure this works here. Okay, so today I'll be asking the board for a final vote on the 2027 affordability schedule. As a reminder, the purpose of the affordability schedule is to determine if a resident is subject to a tax penalty under the state's individual mandate for not having coverage, or if someone is not subject to a penalty because the available coverage would have been too costly to require. During the February board meeting, as Audrey mentioned, the Health Connector approved release of the proposed 2027 affordability schedule for public comment. After the February board vote, we put out notice of public comment that lasted through March 20th. We didn't receive any comments on the proposed schedule and recommend that the board finalize the 2027 affordability schedule as proposed back in February. So here we'll just review how the affordability schedule applies to the market. The affordability schedule does determine whether an uninsured individual must pay a penalty for foregoing coverage. If an individual has access to coverage considered affordable but does not enroll, they would be assessed a tax penalty. Connected Care contributions are always considered affordable according to the schedule, and eligible individuals have to enroll or they would pay a penalty. The affordability schedule does not require employers or carriers to offer affordable coverage. It does not penalize employers or issuers if an individual doesn't enroll in the coverage that they offered. And the affordability schedule is independent of federal policies related to affordable coverage standards. It's also separate from determination of federal premium tax credit amounts. Okay, and so here we're just a quick overview of how this work aligns with our strategic objectives. So two of our strategic objectives that you can see here are first to deliver high value coverage to residents and improve equitable access to affordable coverage. And in this work, we're administering the individual mandate, which helps to maintain and improve the state's insured rate. And we're helping to ensure most people have access to affordable coverage to maintain an effective individual mandate. So those are the two objectives that relate to this work today. And we, again, this is what we reviewed in February, but here you can see the proposed 2027 affordability schedule, which is consistent with the standards used in past years. You can see it compared to 2025 and 2026. I'll just note that aside from high inflation years, these have been consistent, and the high inflation years were 23 and 24. So here is the proposed 2027 schedule for individuals. Just let you take a look for a moment. And just shows you how the premiums would work out. Couples. And then for families. And so I can stop here. That was a lot, but I'm happy to take questions before we go to the vote.
No,
Yes.
question, but more of a comment. First of all, thank you and support the work that the Connector staff have done with moving towards a great set of recommendations.
Michael Counter?
I'm sorry. You need,
Thank you, Shannon.
oh,
We doing the
But we're
vote?
not doing that
I'm
yet.
not doing the vote.
I got you.
Sorry.
The hard question. Should have seven.
I reflexively went back to second grade and thought I was in trouble. It's like, oh, this is all of was calling me out again. I just wanted to note that I think the work here is more important than ever. Insurance is increasingly out of reach and unsustainable for not just the individuals that benefit from the subsidies that are put forward through our work here and the state's support, but increasingly across the market. And our work to reduce those costs systemically have taken on an urgency that we have never seen in Massachusetts. I know the governor made similar comments at our 20th anniversary, and I just need to note that we're reaching a level of unsustainability that is starting to really hurt people. And I know that, you know, these are amounts of money that are hard to figure out how to pay. At a time when costs seem to be going up everywhere, we need to really put shoulders to the wheel. And I don't mean just here at the Connector, but I mean across government and with the stakeholders and the community, providers, insurers, advocates alike to create sustainable change. So I would be remiss if I didn't mention that. But to go back to the actual matter at hand, I fully support the schedule.
Thank you. Oh, I didn't see who was up first, but.
Other comments? Yes, please, Becca.
Yeah, I think it's something very similarly, when I look at these numbers. I support and understand the need for the individual mandate, and then I also think, I'm thinking about the members of 1199 healthcare workers who fall within some of these ranges and are essentially living in poverty. And I know from talking with them firsthand, are really struggling to make these payments. And to make these payments at the same time that they're struggling to put food on their table and support their kids and pay for their kids' work and anything else that's going on in their families. And so I support the individual mandate and look at this with great concern at the same time. And just so that I understand, can you just, so anybody who's eligible for Connector Care, there's no exemption process for that.
So if you were eligible for Connector Care, you would have a premium available to you that falls within the affordability schedule. So all of those people, yes, would be subject to the tax penalty if they fail to enroll in Connector Care. There is an appeals process for penalties. We have an appeals team, and there's lots of regulations about sort of what counts, as appealable. But in terms of Connector Care, those will always be considered under what you saw in the schedule.
Nobody would be approved for an exemption if we follow the schedule.
Just trying to think through. So if you're under 150% of the FPL, I may have had that up there. So you wouldn't have, you would essentially be exempt.
There could be circumstances where somebody is exempted, but by and large, like the structure of the policy says, the state is making available this highly subsidized premium to you. The expectation is that you enroll in this coverage in accordance with the individual mandate. And if you fail to, you'd be subject to a tax penalty, but there is an appeals process. And if you had certain circumstances in your life that, meant you couldn't afford it, and there were all these extenuating circumstances, there is a process for that.
And we can actually follow up with what the list is. It's noted on the Schedule HC. So there's a whole bunch of reasons. We try to look at that each year and think about, does anything need to be added? For example, like when public charge first came around the first time, if somebody was too afraid to enroll in coverage because of the public charge rule, somebody who had a certain immigrant status, we would consider that a hardship, and they wouldn't be subject to the penalty. So it sometimes changes. It's a long list of reasons, but we can follow up.
Yeah, I'd be really interested in, I still feel like I'm pretty new to this space, but I'd definitely be interested in looking at that, what the different criteria are for exemption.
Yes, for sure.
Exemptions.
Is the penalty a set penalty? I should know this.
It's
a set penalty, or does it vary with your income?
It varies. So every year we take a look at the lowest premiums available, and then we calculate it based on that. So it'll either go by the Connector Care premiums, contributions divided by 2, or the lowest. If you're not in the Connector Care ranges, you would look at the lowest cost bronze plan divided by 2.
So it's half of what you would pay for the lowest cost plan available to you.
And we can also follow up just with sort of all that information, so you can see it all together, the penalties for 2026 and what that all looks like with the premium schedule and this year's affordability schedule.
Dimitri looks like he's ready.
Yeah, I certainly dovetail the concern that Becca has raised, and also share the Commissioner's concern with regard to affordability and the individual mandate. We're approaching this wall, if you would, where we have the individual mandate on one side and we have affordability on the other. And yet we have a third leg, which is the actual value of the lowest available premium, where we may be pushing people who can't afford a product into buying a product which will not provide them with the baseline service that they need as it relates to healthcare. So I don't know if these issues can be addressed within the realm of the Health Connector, or if that's something that at a much higher pay grade than we are at and needs to be addressed somewhere else. But the folks who are at the bottom are certainly getting squeezed in a lot of different ways. And this certainly is a reflection of that. And again, whatever we can do on our end to try to allay the issue would be very helpful.
I think I would just disagree on one point, but I think Audrey will probably make that point for me.
Sure, just to clarify, the people who qualify for Connector Care are basically being held steady with a coverage experience with using federal and state subsidies, has not exerted increased cost pressures on them. And that's come at great expense, frankly, to the state, right, to hold steady there. No deductibles, very low cost sharing, guaranteed low premiums that are vastly more affordable than what people at ESI experience. I'm not saying that doesn't mean there's not hardships in the household budget, but I want to be clear. I think there's a different structural conversation to be had about the affordability schedule as it relates to people up to 400% of the poverty level, where the state has done extraordinary nation-leading work to guarantee people have access to very affordable coverage that would be the envy elsewhere in the country. Over 400%, I think we have a very serious issue. And I want to kind of separate those, because that's where there's increasing cost pressures, to the commissioner's point, and no help at all, unless you're covered through an employer. And even then, of course, we know people are facing challenges. But yet we have this interaction with the mandate, which is getting essentially as a policy tool weakened over time, because there's more and more people who don't even have access to what we're saying we do consider as affordable. And so that's where I think the statewide work that both the secretary and the commissioner were remarking on, that's a place where I think that work has to manifest and show up in a helpful way for people. But I just want to clarify that the Connector Care space is a very different animal that we've worked very, very hard to protect. And I just want to make sure that doesn't get lost in this conversation.
And just to clarify my point, I am looking at that 400% window, and I am looking at the working poor who's struggling and getting up every day and going to work and having difficulty as it relates to affordability, having difficulty as it relates to current inflation and the impact of that on available resources to purchase healthcare.
Yeah, I mean, the only point I would make is also that the amount of investment that the state makes in the connector allows, I mean, there are hundreds of thousands of people in Massachusetts who are able to afford a healthcare that if they lived in another state, they would just be without. So I think we.
Oh, that's a given,
I think
It's table stakes, yeah.
often concentrate on what we don't have, right? And I just want to, like, from a national perspective, like the amount of coverage that people are able to afford in Massachusetts is now. There also is I would say that if John Hertz were here, I have to represent John Hertz. If you were here, he would say, well, the other part of it is that we do have way more requirements on insurance. I think that sometimes pushes up the cost of insurance. But I think I've Matt, then Michael. Okay.
Yeah, I'll be brief, and I don't, we're here to prove an affordability schedule. But I can't resist if we're gonna just have a moment to talk broadly about affordability. Just, I hear you and I agree with you on a lot of what you said, Dimitri. And, the connector, I think, has been in a fortunate position in years past where the framework that was established through the federal government, the level of subsidies that came to the state through the ACA and through our waiver, support for that law under the Biden administration. And so it has, in some respects, put this organization and this board in a position of not having to as much worry about the affordability pressures for the people that we serve because we're able to buffer that impact on our members. That's why I was glad to see in the last strategic plan for the connector that we started to amp up the focus on affordability, and this board has expressed a desire to use its voice and use its pulpit a little bit more to raise the level of concern. And I would say all of what Audrey and the secretary have said is, I understand to be correct. I never would have doubted it. That the way it's set up now, it does provide a path for affordability for a lot of people. We can do that this year. We may be able to do that for beyond that, but I really worry about what this means for the long term for affordability in the connector, for the sustainability of this model for the state. And of course, everyone outside of the connector as well, including my members. So the members you talk about, those people that, they're 9-to-5ers, they're, hard workers, the working poor, working middle class. Those are my members too. And time is now. Like, it's not coming, it's here. Sorry to get on my little soapbox.
So I have a few quick reactions. The first one is the state is doing a lot on affordability, as you mentioned. Policy Commission, there's the Affordability Council, so we could have a separate conversation about what the fundamental problem is, which we're not going to solve any of the stuff we do. Healthcare spending keep rising, and there's a place and a venue to deal with that, and that really matters. I think the most natural way for us to engage in that debate, given the other work going on, is actually the single approval stuff and trying to make sure that we design the plan such that people don't have barriers to the care that you really, really need them to have. That will lead to some very challenging discussions about the specific clinical areas, and that's probably a single approval discussion, more sort of an affordability discussion. I think some of the confusion that I think arises in the affordability debate, and you went through, it doesn't apply to this, it doesn't apply to that, is actually who it applies to. So I think it might be useful if you just want to say, just publicly, that if you have less than 400% of federal poverty, for example, you would be eligible for connector care unless you have affordable employer coverage, right?
Yep.
So then the affordability schedule wouldn't matter. This is basically, wouldn't matter to you. It really just determines what the employer has to offer you to make it affordable. So if you don't have access to coverage that meets these guidelines, you would still be able to get coverage through the connector care because you would be deemed your employer.
Or the backup plan.
And I think the discussion here that gets sort of confused is this is really about, I think it's really about understanding who ends up going to connector care versus who ends up having to buy employer coverage that them offers that might be deemed unaffordable on this. And I think one of the slide bullet points said, this doesn't force employers to offer. So there's this confusion, I think, because this is really about, I think, understanding if I'm offered plans by my employer, what are the premiums offered to me in my out-of-pocket have to be before that I have to take, as opposed to going to connector care, where I actually might get a better deal than what my employer offers me, because the connector care premiums, as you point out, may be better than the out-of-pocket that I have to pay to join my employer plan, even if my employer plan is affordable. I think that's my understanding of what's going on. I am not an expert.
I think,
So I would say that I'll turn it over to Audrey and Nancy, but I would say that we all have very strong feelings about affordability and what it means to live in the state. I would say that this is probably not the form that's going to resolve health insurance affordability.
Yeah.
I'd like to emphasize what Michael was saying, just as you're thinking of your comments, right? This is not the place where we actually are able to drive down costs for people. Like, I just want to remind people, like, I know, like, we sort of feel that it's all connected, but the connector is not what's going to make us have cheaper healthcare. So,
I think the really interesting thing is the gap between these numbers and what the connector care premium would be, because in some sense, that's basically what you have. In other words, what is really going on is if you get an offered employer plan that's above the connector plan, but within these numbers, then you have to take the employer plan, and that's what you're on the hook for, relative to what you would have been on the hook for if you put the. But again, I think we're agreeing, Secretary, that there's a lot going on affordability, so it's not gonna be this. Despite the title.
Look like she wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, that's helpful, and I do feel like I'm just sort of learning in this space. I just want to throw out there that obviously there's also lots of people who are working who aren't offered an employer plan. So like, this is it. It's not that they're comparing this with an employer plan, they're comparing this with either not having health insurance, paying the penalty, or.
But I think that's not the case. I think if you're not offered an employer plan, this doesn't affect you at all. You just get the connector care premiums.
You would need to, the state would expect you to enroll in connector care.
And you would pay the connector care premiums, which aren't necessarily these numbers.
You're guaranteed something this low cost.
That's right. I
You might
understand,
have,
but it could be even
yes,
better.
right, it could, under EPTC, there were cases where it was better. But otherwise, this is the lowest cost plan available to you. Just, don't let Nancy speak, but I would just say, yes, that way zooming out, just, I think it might be helpful to recall 20 years ago, the state said, as part of our health reform compact, we are creating an expectation that people in Massachusetts ought to carry health insurance coverage, period. Then the state had to say, how do we qualify that? Like, what if somebody doesn't have access to something that any reasonable person would consider affordable? How do we define what should be considered affordable, and thereby we expect that person to enroll in it because it's good enough coverage and it's affordable enough? And this is a representation of how we've approached that in the state. It's a progressive schedule that says if you're really low income, you shouldn't have to kick in that much. We just know where your budget's at. If you're higher income, it should be, 8+% of your income. So that's what this represents. And then you exist in a market where you may have an offer from an employer, you may be eligible for connector care, you may be eligible for, fill in the blank program or coverage option. But this is the state's point of view on what should be considered reasonable to expect you to pay up to.
Good?
Can I?
We're not good, but no. Go ahead.
Sorry. I appreciate it if you sit at your right hand. I don't get called on.
Yes.
I think I support the affordability schedule. I think the points people have made are good. I think there's an interesting and maybe important piece of work to do that is relevant to the two policy tools we try to use to expand coverage. One is the affordability schedule. I guess three. One is the MCC and one is the individual mandate. And my suspicion is if we looked back over several years, the affordability schedule actually hasn't changed very much. MCC hasn't changed very much. I suspect that the impact of the individual mandate, however, has eroded because of the premium increases that we have been talking about. And to Dimitri's point, which I don't want to lose, we may be increasingly requiring people to buy very much skimpier levels of coverage than we did it when the law was first enacted. So I'd be very curious in looking at something that looked at this a little longitudinally and try to combine it with data from the revenue department on who is exempt from the individual mandate, what else is happening, because I think we might get some interesting insights and information from that would be relevant to whether we might want to consider tweaking any of these tools in any way. So I would say I think we should do that.
It's a great idea. We can look into that and get back to you in the board.
Yeah.
You look to my right first.
I know that's not your natural reaction.
Any other questions? So
I
moved.
second.
And so we are going for the Michael Calgio is in trouble roll call.
Yes.
Channel.
Yes.
Michael Cherno,
Yes.
Bella,
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
Katia,
Yes.
Rebecca,
Yes.
Robin,
Yes.
Dimitri,
Yes.
Secretary,
Yes,
Nancy,
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kayla. The next item on the agenda is a presentation on the final amendments to the minimum creditable coverage requirement, which will include a vote, and it's being presented by Michael Pinella. Following your thoughts, first you talked about now we'll do MCC. Yeah.
Good morning. I'm Michael Cannella. I'm Assistant General Counsel at the Health Connector, and I'm going to walk us through the minimum credible coverage regulation amendments portion of today's board meeting. Actually, that's great. So we seek to have the board vote to finalize the proposed amendments to the MCC regulations at 956 CMR 5 after our public comment period concluded on April 2nd. Back in February, this board voted to approve proposed amendments to preserve access to evidence-based no-cost preventive services and protect against erosion of those standards at the federal level. I'm going to walk through some reorienting information about MCC and the preventive services provisions, walk you through the proposed amendment language, give some insight into the public comments we received, and refresh our memories about the actual text of the final recommended amendment and tee up for your consideration the vote to issue that change. Mouse is, I am not advancing, so if there's any way we could advance the slide, please.
Right now, right now.
Let's see. Nope. There it goes. Is that me or is that you?
There's a bit of a lag.
There's a lag. Okay. I'll have to vamp, I guess, between slide transitions. Nope. Keys are not there.
It's like live TV, there's an 8-second lag.
There's an 8-second delay. We can cover up all the bad lags. So as a quick refresher on MCC, so this is part of Chapter 58 as we've been discussing, and this is connected to our state's individual mandate to require folks have coverage that meets certain standards. It's operated at a high level, so the board sets what the MCC standards are through regulation, and this applies to our state's 5.6 million residents. We specify what someone needs to have in their health insurance coverage to avoid a tax penalty, and the MCC regulations identify multiple pathways for somebody to accomplish that. The goal here is to ensure that there is a floor of benefits that individuals in the Commonwealth should be looking to acquire in the coverage they enroll in. There it goes. The preventive services portion of the MCC regulations relies on the federal definition of preventive health services to identify which are the no-cost preventive services that a Massachusetts resident needs to have in their coverage to satisfy the individual mandate and avoid a tax penalty. That federal law relies on the recommendations from these various clinical bodies, so U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, ACIP, and the Health Resources Services Administration, HRSA. There have been, as Audrey noted at the top, some confirming developments, both as a matter of case law and federal administration policy actions that have called into question the reliability of this legal mechanism in federal law that assumes that these clinical bodies will make evidence-based recommendations that will then carry the force of law. Before pivoting to the substance of the amendment, just want to re-anchor that this conversation is connected to our strategic objectives in 2026. So as Kayla noted before, delivering high-value coverage to the residents of Massachusetts, MCC is all about ensuring that residents of the Commonwealth can satisfy the individual mandate using high-value methods of paying for care, and then improving equitable access to affordable health insurance coverage. MCC is all about making sure, and in particular, these amendments are all about making sure that preventive health services are available without cost sharing so that folks can actually get access to the care that we think is beneficial to them without cost barriers. Moving on to the actual proposed amendments. So back in February, this board voted to propose locking in the definition, a reference to those federal standards that existed as of July 1 of 2025 to safeguard against those concerns at the federal level. The actual text of the amendment as proposed is as follows. Preventive health services will be qualified by noting, provided, however, that these services shall, at minimum, include all such preventive health services required by established federal regulatory and sub-regulatory guidance pursuant to 42 U.S.C. section 300 GG-13 as of July 1, 2025. The context of this proposal as voted upon by the board and put out to the public is that the Issuance and finalization of any such change would be made to align with the 2027 tax year. As the board's been discussing this morning with the affordability schedule, this is a requirement that people experience through their tax returns. And so any changes to the MCC regulations need to be aligned so that folks are not filing their taxes and evaluating their compliance under two different standards in the same tax year. We held a public comment period that went through April 2nd, and that comment period concluded with the holding of a public hearing on that date. No oral testimony was provided during that hearing. However, we did receive written comments from two sources, from the Department of Public Health and the Health Equity Compact, both in support of the changes as drafted and noting the same policy concerns brought before the board in asking for the board's approval to initiate these amendments. As such, the Health Connector staff recommend that the board adopt the amendment as proposed without modification as a final change to the regulations. And as noted before, we would hold on to the amendment for publication to align with the tax year. As you can see, this is how the timeline and next steps will proceed. If the board votes to approve to adopt this amendment as drafted, we would then take some minor procedural steps with the Secretary of the Commonwealth's office, but would sit on the regulation until December to ensure that it's published. As a reminder, while the board votes today to potentially approve this change, it does not go into effect until it is published in the CMR, the Code of Massachusetts Regulations. With that, I welcome any questions about the amendment, and then we can proceed to a vote. Yes.
Can you just speak to, just in general, how public comment periods are treated? Like, how does the information get out? And not, for
Yeah.
this, but in general.
Yeah, so the way that the public comment periods work is that we, like any other agency, have an obligation under state law to do certain steps before we initiate any regulatory change. So we have noticing obligations to local government advisory committee agencies. We have to publish the notice of public hearing in the CMR, the Code of Massachusetts Regulations, so it's available there. We have to make a publication in a newspaper of common and prevalent circulation, in this case, the Boston Globe, at least 21 days prior to the hearing. If there are any interested parties, stakeholders who would like to get regular updates about Health Connector regulatory activities, we forward that information to their attention to make sure that they can plan and prepare to attend. And then folks are always able and available to attend the hearing. We post these materials on our website, noting these regulations are under review, along with the information for how to attend the hearing. An agency is required to have a comment period. They're not required to do a hearing, but it's always been Health Connector practice to hold a hearing. You're welcome. Yes.
I have an and or sort of question.
Okay.
So I understand the concern, and the proposal would make sure that anything that was prevented in 2025 is still prevented.
Yes.
But if something new became preventive, we could then, if I understand it, it's a minimum. It's not, we're not
Yes.
locking in 2025, we're setting that as a floor.
Correct.
So I also understand what we're doing here, and I support it. I'm trying to understand what the implications would be. So let's say this may have already happened. If it's already happened, please tell me. But there is a deviation between what was considered preventative in 2025 in some future year, right? What are the implications of that, if any, other than the intended effect here of maintaining coverage for a robust set of preventive services? So I'm thinking, are there financial dynamics that we need to be aware of, or do we generate any sort of risk that the board needs to be aware of? I think this is not my space, so this is out of my own ignorance.
I have a
Please.
thought on that. I brought it up at one of our other meetings when we went through this. I continue to support the goals of this policy. I continue to worry that we might have some people caught up in this from out of state. So where it might impact, in my opinion, is someone enrolls in a plan from their employer out of Nevada or North Carolina or Texas or another state, Florida. that plan follows the preventative definitions under federal rules, which now diverge from our definition. And so as a result, that person who's working for that employer in Texas is now in a plan that doesn't meet MCC.
Gotcha.
Of their own. Now there's appeal process in those kind of cases, but I'm wondering, in terms of what we can reasonably do, I'm wondering if it starts with at least tracking the data. I know there's 50,000 people or so who are paying taxes today, they're not having coverage. I'm wondering if it would make sense for us to, if we haven't already, start to track, all right, who's paying a penalty, but is maintaining coverage of some kind. Then we can dive in and say, all right, well, we've got this segment of the 50,000 that are paying a penalty because they don't have coverage that we deem is appropriate. They have control over that. Or do we have a group of people that are paying the penalty and they're just buying their plan from their employer in Florida, Texas, and North Carolina? So I don't, there are appeals rights, but do they know about them? Are we doing all that we can to make sure they understand? If you don't believe this is equitable, this is all that you had available, can you avoid the penalties? So I think my suggestion is at least data to find out, are there people that are either getting caught up in it now or in the future, as our definition diverges from the federal one, do we see an increase in unintended consequence?
Yeah, or any other unintended consequence, right, that we need to be aware of and accommodate. Thank you, that's really helpful.
How many,
I would say.
how many,
Yeah,
how
so
many requests for exemptions did we have last year?
So this would not be an issue of it, well, in terms of getting through the Health Connector's formal exemption process, we would have to come back to the board with that data. But most employers or brokers or insurance companies are savvy enough to know that if they have a client who has individuals who are going to be enrolled in Massachusetts, to come to the Health Connector and get certification if they have reason to believe that they have some doubts. So some of them are proactive and just want to have the approval. Some of them are savvy enough to read the regulations and know what I'm preparing for this client is going to fit within the four regulations provided in the various different pathways. But if they have doubts, or typically it's a deductible slightly too high or something's off on the math, they come and file with us, and those you generally get approved, but we would have to produce that data.
Right, and that's an exemption process that existed for 20 years.
Yes.
In which an employer can, someone for any reason come and say, my coverage is not.
Yeah, and that's a front end effort, so that employer could then confidently tell their employees, yes, this is something you can use to satisfy your individual mandate requirements, and they'd be all set, as opposed to the after the fact pathways, which is the appeals process.
And so I just, for abundance of clarity, there's a belt and suspenders approach for the situation you're describing. The employer has a pathway to the connector to say, hey, I'm really close, not quite, but the spirit of it. That. Then there's a back end process. Some reason the employer wasn't savvy enough to do that. And it is right on the tax form. No, I didn't have MCC, but it's da-da-da-da-da. And then there's a pathway, they come right to us, and there's a whole process. Fully hear your concern, and it's really important to always think about edge cases. We always try to think about edge cases and back into, like, if that happened to me, how would I feel about it? How would I want to be treated? What information would I want to have put in front of me? So 100% with you, and we can also do a dive into what pieces of data to kind of fill in. I understand your policy question, like, and what of our data versus DOR? So we can certainly look into that. But just kind of a more philosophical point I think might be helpful here too to remember. Massachusetts has always deviated from the rest of the country in terms of our standards for coverage since the minute we had an individual mandate. Like, our mandate said you had to include prescription drug coverage, maternity care. All over the country, employers offer coverage that didn't meet those standards. And so we always, and if there's a different policy direction the Commonwealth wants to go, that's a different conversation. But we've always absorbed the risk of the fact that Massachusetts has higher standards than the rest of the country. And we've absorbed that risk along with a lot of measures to protect individuals from that policy. So I just want to acknowledge that that was always baked into the framework that from an operational perspective we've executed.
Questions from the right? Left? Okay. Do we need a vote on this one? Yes, so Do I have a motion?
So, second.
Thank you, Dimitri. And we now have a roll call.
Michael Calvo,
Yes.
Michael Cherno.
Yes.
Bella,
Yes.
Eric,
Yes.
Katia,
Yes.
Rebecca,
Yes.
Robin,
Yes.
Secretary, Nancy,
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Kathy. I'll vote yes.
Oh, I think we forgot Dimitri in the vote.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dimitri, for the record.
Dimitri, this is like a second grade class. The person who spoke the most just.
Dimitri, please go to the office.
I'm probably next.
The next two items of the agenda are strategy focused updates for the board. We kick off these two items. The first of which will be a technology roadmap presentation by the Chief Technology Office. With the David Metro. Okay.
Okay, well, I'm gonna just kind of frame up the next two items, as the secretary noted, are really in contrast to the two items we just voted on, which are very concrete policy items that we needed your approval on from a regulatory perspective. The next two items are really about the investment we're doing at the connector in our infrastructure, our readiness for the future, our strategic direction as an organization to really meet the future needs and the future moments that we anticipate. You all know me very well and know that I am a policy person by DNA, but people who really understand policy know that at the core of what we do in the modern age, so much rests on technology in terms of our ability to deliver our services to the public and to support ourselves as an organization doing that delivery of service. And so I'm really excited. I believe actually the last time we were in this room, David was truly brand new to the connector. We've been so pleased to welcome him as the Health Connector's first ever Chief Technology Officer. David has been an incredible breath of fresh air and brought a fresh and unique perspective to assessing our technology infrastructure enterprise-wide, thinking about how we deliver our services to the public and support ourselves internally. And I asked him to take a really fresh look at assessing where we are today and where we need to go in the future from a technology perspective. So I asked him to come to this board meeting and just share the very tip of the iceberg in terms of his thinking about a roadmap around technology. So I won't steal his thunder. I couldn't even if I tried. And just to be clear, this is really just to get the board acclimated to the kind of thinking we're doing here and would imagine returning with additional detail to discuss with the board. But knowing this is not the type of topic we've brought to the board before, but really ought to, and I'm interested in bringing more of these kinds of conversations about our internal strategic direction and places we're investing to be ready for the future. I'm excited to have David share a little bit of his thinking and our thinking internally about where we're going. So David, I will hand to you.
Thank you. I think I'm glad to be here today. I'm nervous about the lag. I'll find out how that works. So today I want to focus on technology direction. And that means the landscape we rely on and how it supports the Health Connector's strategic priorities and how we move from roadmap to delivery. So over time, the Health Connector has strengthened the platforms that support eligibility, enrollment, billing, and service delivery. That effort has supported the organization's core mission and the customer experience. Going forward, the goal is to look beyond individual systems and focus on the broader technology environment we rely on. Now I pass the lag. Okay, no lag. All right, so the connector operates a complex, interdependent technology environment. So technology is central to how the Health Connector operates while enabling the public to access coverage. Focused effort has advanced our public-facing systems across our eligibility, enrollment, billing, and service delivery. The organization also relies on internal platforms, complex business systems, state-managed services, and less visible support practices. Ownership is mixed, but the Health Connector depends on these systems and services working together. This roadmap broadens the focus beyond individual systems. It strengthens the internal foundation while continuing to improve the customer journey. Sure.
So, and I'm good if I have the example. So I understand what the external facing, internal, just your regular computers and things like that, or what are the other internal platforms in business?
Fabulous question. So it's, of course, the technology that helps the organization run, right? And these are our, you can think at the user level, our desktop equipment, our peripherals, et cetera, but also our organizational infrastructure, if you would, our networks, our servers, our cloud infrastructure, things like that. Our information systems, right? For where we store our data, our document management platforms. So it's our financial systems, HR systems, et cetera. So it's beyond, and also there are back-end systems that feed into our customer-facing platforms as well. So they're all interconnected. No, and you're actually foreshadowing what we'll talk about in a moment. Yeah, thank you. Great question. In general, because this is a relatively new topic, I'm happy to take questions. Well, going back to the technology direction, the roadmap starts with our strategic plan. The Health Connector's 2024 to 2028 strategic plan sets expectations for access, trust, reliable operation, accountability, compliance, and governed information. It does that in a complex, regulated environment. Reliable access, lower administrative friction, accountability, oversight, and trusted information all depend on technology being planned and managed deliberately. These expectations raise the bar for how technology is planned, managed, and sustained. So what does the strategy require from technology? Our strategic plan depends on a technology foundation that performs reliably across our systems, data, and operations. That means consistent experiences, protected information, reliable data, better staff platforms, and the ability to absorb change without creating new risk. These expectations have to be met together. They do not arrive one at a time, and they cannot be handled one system at a time. This is why we need a broader technology direction. What does the public get from our technology roadmap? So the public value is practical. The roadmap strengthens access, service reliability, information protection, and stewardship of public resources. For applicants, members, and small employers, this means a clearer coverage journey. And for our staff, it means better information to answer questions and resolve issues consistently. That also means more reliable service during change and peak demand, with stronger protection of sensitive information and our public resources. The systems and information behind the scenes affect how the people experience the Health Connector. So that said, individual technology improvements are not enough. So the Health Connector has made significant progress improving our customer-facing systems. The broader technology environment needs the same level of attention. Individual technology improvements remain important, but customer journeys cross our systems, our partners, and our teams. And our operating needs also require capacity, tools, support models, and readiness. Stronger foundations keep our technology process connected to reliable operations, future growth, and the customer experience. When I say strengthen the internal foundation, we need stronger foundations to support high-quality operations, clearer visibility, and continued improvement in the customer journey. That need shows up in 4 primary gaps in our current environment. Control and visibility gaps make issues harder to detect early. Information gaps make data, documents, and records harder to find, trust, and govern. Platform gaps show up when tools and systems are used unevenly, and capacity and planning gaps show up when urgent needs crowd out our foundational work. Addressing these gaps reduces friction, improves our visibility, and creates a stronger foundation for continued progress. So technology needs to be managed as a core organizational function, not as a series of separate projects, systems, and requests. Our guiding principles will keep our decisions consistent when priorities compete. Direction must be set deliberately. Accountability is tied to outcomes and long-term support. And priorities are evaluated against risk, capacity, cost, and value. Standards are applied consistently across our shared platforms, data, and controls, and improvement is managed continuously. Clear ownership, consistent standards, and deliberate prioritization give our leadership a stronger view of our priorities, trade-offs, and long-term support. When I talk about a roadmap is not a project list. Right? A project list tells us what is active. A roadmap tells us whether capabilities, dependencies, and outcomes are aligned. Different efforts need different approaches. Customer journey, controls and readiness, information lifecycle, and reliability of daily operations all require different views. Sequencing matters because not everything can move at the same time or depend on the same supports. The Health Connector's technology roadmap gives leadership a clear view of direction, trade-offs, and readiness before commitments are made. So when looking at a roadmap for the connector, we're going to organize this into 4 main areas. Our customer experience will focus on our full customer journey from our digital entry points through enrollment, billing, and support. Security, risk, and trust will focus on protecting systems and information, managing risk, and supporting compliance through appropriate governance. Information management focuses on data, documents, and records as our shared organizational assets. And technology services focuses on the tools, platforms, infrastructure, and cloud environments that support staff and operations. These areas will give our roadmap structure while keeping related decisions connected. On the right, you can see thumbnails of a direction of roadmap pairing. One of these exists for each of the 4 areas. So what you're seeing here is a condensed roadmap. Each area has a direction, a roadmap focus, and signals of progress. Progress should be visible. It will result in clearer journeys, trusted information, more reliable tools, stronger support, and governance appropriate to the risk. Each area has its own focus, but the roadmap will stay connected. And looking ahead, from our direction to delivery. From here, we move into focused action. We will define first priorities, key dependencies, and readiness to proceed. We will make better use of existing platforms, tools, and vendor relationships before adding new solutions. We will sequence priorities across the roadmap and identify support, procurement, and decision points before additional commitments are made. As the roadmap becomes more specific, we will come back to the board with updates on progress, key dependencies, and decisions that will need visibility or direction. The path forward is focused and achievable. We will build on progress, strengthen the foundation, and keep improving with confidence. I thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Are you gonna turn left or right for our hands?
I mean, Nancy, if you wanna go first.
No, okay. Like I have the attention.
A general question, AI, how does that fit into this picture? Is it like that?
Absolutely. When I think of AI, I think of emerging technologies, and there's generative AI, which is the ChatGPTs and Geminis and things like that, where it's a chatbot. But there's also machine learning. There are pattern matching tools, autocomplete, things of that nature. So AI is a key area we'll be investing in, but not as a job replacement, but as a job enhancement, right? So it will give our staff greater tools. Will reduce some inefficiencies, right? Drafting memos, things of that nature, right? And also the potential for externally facing chatbots, which the Commonwealth is investing in writ large. This allows for, if done correctly, constrained chatbots based on policies and things like that, and it allows for natural language capabilities so people can search and interact with their first language, if you would. So we will be working to deploy Gen AI capabilities. We're doing this in concert with Commonwealth, right? We're following their lead. But the risk is that you go too fast and you can create more problems than you solve, right? So I mentioned earlier data classification and protections. We have to make sure that our organization is feeding the right information into AI, right? That our member and customer information is always protected, right? That there's a human in the loop when all possible, so we're not sending out unverified information. And we need appropriate policies in place to say to staff when you should use it, when you shouldn't use it. Yeah.
Someone asked me a question and about the connector, and I said, geez, I don't know. But I said, oh, go to my little Copilot here and see if I can ask. And it really did help. It told me, where to go for help, what to do. And so I don't know how much that, how much it can improve maybe the experience on the front end for eligibility and enrollment and all that kind of thing. That's what I was.
Absolutely. And AI, again, comes in so many capabilities and ways. OCR, for optical character recognition, that's a form of AI, right? And so better eligibility screening and form management, things like that, that's all possible. Again, we need to understand where the information is going and always protecting our information first. And then finally, it's a great question. This is one I'm certainly interested in. But from an administrative function, it can help the connector with a lot of the backend processes that take a lot of time. But these include policies, job descriptions, things like that, where we can rely on external sources to help that work. Thank you.
Nancy, then Eric, then Michael.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. That's a great presentation, and it's terrific to have this on the agenda, and I look forward to more of it. I also want to comment, it's really nice in each of these presentations to tie things to the strategic priorities. I don't think we've done that before, and I think that's a really nice addition, so thanks for that. Could you take one of the 4 distinct areas, maybe the customer experience, and sort of give us an example of like where we are now and where you're hoping for the roadmap will be in terms of customer experience, customer journey, like make it just a little bit more concrete. It kind of goes to Robin's.
So I'll choose customer experience since you brought it up. There's been a lot of investment in customer experience, and a lot of that investment's been platform by platform, right? So we're going to upgrade, or we're going to work on platform, right? Eligibility. We're going to work on premium billing, or our contact center, or the website. But they're often done in isolation. So the experience that a customer, a member, right? It will be different because the information doesn't necessarily travel. The experience doesn't travel from system to system, right? So a lot of the work in that, and I'll say certainly the customer experience one is the most evolved here. I mean, it's, of course, we've been investing in it for 20 years now, right? But keeping that, when I say, again, I'm going to reuse the word experience, but keeping the expectations that the customer sees across all of our different channels is very important. One of the issues we have now, and I'm most certainly not the expert, I'm still within my first year, but our end user support doesn't understand all the interactions that have happened in all of our different systems, right? And so if they're not as proactive as they could be, right, with the information they're sharing, but if that information traveled to the appropriate platforms, when someone will contact the contact center, all the notices information will be there, past experiences, et cetera, with it. So it's a front end aspect, but also the information and member information, customer information across all the platforms.
So is it connecting the systems?
Yes. A lot of the, so on the customer experience side, for certain. On the other roadmaps, and I won't go into detail on those, but a lot of it is we've had isolated deployments based on either the initial launch of the connector or during the pandemic when they had a large rapid deployment of systems, but it didn't change our other platforms. So they ended up with duplication of systems. A lot of it came from a break fix. We needed a new system. Let's get a new one, right? Or a need from a certain program. But nothing concrete across the board. So it's not just tying them all together per se. It's making sure we have the right systems in the right areas and we don't have duplication of platforms. And then how are we managing the information within all those?
And then everyone's not doing their own thing. Like
Yeah.
I save my document on my hard drive, you save yours in SharePoint, you save yours in Teams.
Right.
Or you don't do that, that's a pathology, yeah.
And mentioning with information management, one of the areas of focus will be document management. For that reason alone, so much effort is spent creating these documents.
Yeah, or finding them.
And finding them, but a lot of times they're not known outside the individual or team. And when people move on, the information can get lost.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of organizational assets and knowledge that gets lost.
Okay, that's helpful.
Sure. And then with the compliance, like knowing what people have and make sure that's being protected. Yeah.
I'm sure we don't have that problem.
Thank you. Great presentation. Those 4 areas look outstanding. I kept thinking as you were speaking that it could be one of you doing this job, or it could be 50 of you doing the job, and to be fully busy with all this. And so I know you have to work on everything at once. I would just maybe highlight that when I look at these 4 areas, if we're not completely secure, none of the other stuff can happen.
Right.
So if at all possible to consider high priority on the security and risk, and just for my work, working with employers large and small, there are so many bad guys out there, and they're getting more and more creative. And we hear about the breaches when they're big organizations and maybe public organizations, but they're happening all the time. The smaller ones that don't get into this. So whether it's internal training, looking at all efficiency, getting people to try to break our systems, you know, on our behalf to try to figure it out. I would just encourage that to be a pretty high priority for the company.
And I so greatly appreciate that. And this is one of those areas where AI could also be a threat to us, right? We all, I think in our careers have seen the old spam emails, with the different princes wanting a different bank account information, right? And those are long gone, right? Now these are I mean, with AI, you can gather information quickly. You can create documents and websites that look pristine and just like the organizations, right? So it's very easy to manipulate or create threat areas for our staff and for the public, which look like ours, right? So we have to have systems in place and education in place for that. So 100%. I mean, Audrey's going to talk a little bit about risk, but I look at how we're going to organize all this work, and you know, there's a lot to do, right? But we're going to take a risk-based approach to it, right? Not just look at the shiny things, but where are our threats, address those first. I keep talking about foundational aspects because building that strong foundation and then deploying technologies on top of it, and security needs to be built in. So you're speaking my language. Thank you.
So this is terrific. My question is, can you outline what you think the big strategic questions are in light of this roadmap? And so part of this is just sort of a yay, Godspeed. But there's another part of this, which is there's some decisions that may have to be made around how to execute on this roadmap. The one I would call to attention would be when to use vendors, which vendors to use, and when to build things internal, for example. But if and that's next to me is a big strategic decision. How many vendors to use as opposed to, do you have one soup to nuts, or do you have specialized ones for the different pieces? And so I'm interested in what you think sort of the big strategic questions related to this roadmap that might come to the board would be, if you would have to follow.
Godspeed with the question.
Yeah.
My general reaction was great, dude. I agree that security is super important, but honestly, I think we need better customer experience to meet our goals. So, and someone could talk about all the other ones. So anyway, but the point is really that's just like, yes, because you said they all have to be done together. But I do think there's board level decisions that we have to maybe think through, and I'd love to know what those might be.
So one of the challenges in public sector technology, and most certainly at the connector, is resource constraints, right? And the connector is a small organization, and the technology footprint, I think, from a staffing and resource perspective, is small for the complications and the importance of the area. So we can't, I mean, you mentioned building things internally. That requires not only upfront investment, but there's a long-term maintenance aspect to it, right? And so if you could reasonably source it, work or projects externally, right, and to keep your staff focused on areas that can't be sourced, that's probably a better approach. I mean, we're not going to build everything from scratch and manage it internally. That would be a staff larger than the entire connector, right? So what I would come to the board with would be, here's tools and technologies necessary that we could run either with ourselves, with our existing or slightly modified staff, but also here's partners who could help execute this for us, but trying to avoid vendor lock-in, right? So we can move things across. But it's more of a, it's not an easy question to answer because those four areas are all require different conversations with the board about different times. I'll probably come first. I mean, our customer experience platforms and systems are running, they're running well. There's continued investment. Probably come more, I mean, this isn't a connector issue. No matter where I was, I would say we need to ensure that we're taking a risk-based approach to our information management and security platforms, right? And just making sure that, and we can't just deploy security systems and go, we're done, right? I mean, there's a constant evolution there. Our organization is not set up to necessarily keep pace with that at the moment. So implementing those platforms and building the capabilities to keep it going.
And if I could just add, I think that I completely agree with everything David said. And I don't think we have a predetermined sort of proposal we expect to come back to you with in 4 months or 6 months. It's possible. And part of the purpose of the conversation today was to start to just open the door for your awareness of how hard we're thinking about this and how much is under the hood. And also, frankly, and I'll just say this, there's some deferred maintenance here, right, from an organizational perspective in terms of investing in this kind of thinking and this kind of organizational strategy setting and making hard decisions now, so we're not in the newspaper in 5 years because of some, frightening breach, that type of thing. So again, without getting ahead of where our deepening exploration takes us, I will underscore David's point. We're a much leaner organization than the public has any idea. We're 90 people. It's a really lean team for what it is we do in terms of the complexity of the systems we have taped together and how successful we've been. And that is a credit to our team's, frankly, heroism. And so, again, this is not me, predicting that we're going to come back and say we need to double our size. We will be incredibly thoughtful. But I do just want to make clear has been a lot of heroic work in very manual ways to keep things working as well as they have appeared to work. And I think it's important we have more sort of detailed, open conversations about that and what it would mean to get on more solid footing.
And it may be that the trade-off ends up being, we really have to have a serious budget conversation. I understand you're not asking that now.
No, we're
I'm
not.
just trying to anticipate what's coming down the road to.
Absolutely.
I know, can I just say one thing? I just want to emphasize that point that you just made, because we're in the same boat, right? At the GIC, we've got 61 staff. All right, we manage a $4 billion budget for 500,000 people's insurance. And it's not unique to the connector, but it is an obligation, I think, for the board to understand that and to understand the risk that brings to the enterprise. I think we're all acknowledging that, right? So I think an openness to those sorts of discussions as we go forward I would welcome it.
Thank you. First and foremost, I want to say thank you, David, for taking the time to put this together, and welcome to the second in-person meeting. So, now that we're done with the pleasantry, we can get done. I think given the fact that we're a very lean organization, it's very important for us to be strategic in our approach in terms of how do we deal with technology and how do we ensure that we can manage technology. So as I look at this exercise, it's very important to me for us to be able to map and overlay the technology roadmap with the pillars that has been established as it relates to the strategic plan. So the 4 areas that you mentioned, those are very nice, but they all have to map back into the pillars as they're identified within the structure of the strategic plan, which also means that we have to go back to some basics that maybe we have already started to tackle and we have achieved. Maybe those things have not been looked at yet. Amongst them are data governance and standardization. Historically, we have had issues with standardization. We see these issues every time we migrate from vendor to vendor. We are at the mercy of the vendors in terms of transition. So as we look at standardization, part of that is we have to own our data. We have to know what our data is, and we have to dictate the structure of that data so that when we hand that to a vendor, we can ensure that on some determined frequency, that vendor is able to push that data back to us and we can test it and make sure that it's what it is that it's supposed to be, so that when we replace that vendor with the next vendor, we don't have a transition issue. And this is something that we have experienced in the past during my tenure on the board, have been transitioning from vendor to vendor and delays that are associated with that. because of issues as it relates to data standardization and data governance. So also that's an area that's very important that we need to figure out. We have to start overlaying these things as Michael indicated, as others indicated, we can't do everything ourselves. Some of the things we're gonna have to outsource, which means that control is one of the things that we have to have in line. The second thing is you touched on the security, and as we talk about security across the board as it relates to data, as it relates to third-party producers and providers, whether we're talking about inter or connector issues, those are all areas that we have to look at. We mentioned AI before. You can't start rolling AI into an environment unless you have governance as it relates to your data. You can't roll AI in, the agents that you're rolling in, what are the rules that are going to dictate what those agents are going to do? And if you give them access to too much information, if they start hallucinating, who's gonna know that they're hallucinating? So again, we go back to the basics, governance and standardization. So, and that also ties back to HR, whether or not when we bring someone on board, the SOP that's defined as it relates to the role that the person is going to play. How does that SOP migrate its way all the way up? So if we have agents that are supporting that person, then that agent needs to fall in line with that so that we can restrict the function of those agents in terms of AI agents. So for me, it's the basics that we need to step back to in terms of none of this has anything to do with you because we've been doing this for a while and a lot of it has been, let's get it done. Now that we have a moment to breathe, we have to step back a little bit and be more strategic in our approach and not necessarily look for the most tactical solution to address the immediate need. So for me, importantly, is seeing how we overlay all these things and yet when you are working as hard as you are working, you need to have the sense that you're getting things done. How do we define the KPIs that relates to the strategic plans and be able to show to the board to a certain extent? These are tying back to the work that we're doing so that when we do have to make an investment, it's very clear in terms of not just the cost, but the immediate ROI as it relates to the service that we will be providing and the folks that we will be able to help, as well as the work that we will be able to reduce as it relates to the organization. 90 strong, that means that lean organization, let's keep it that way and let's get smarter and not work harder and let's leverage technology to do that.
Just briefly, and just a point of personal privilege, I don't have a cold, it's just allergies. So I don't want anybody to worry about me. So I'm gonna speak out of understandable ignorance about the details of the internal systems and only really from my own experience at the GIC, because we have similar conversations, right? And similar imperatives to think about technology in the way that you all are thinking about technology. Number one, it's an excellent presentation. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're doing it. Thank you, Audrey, for bringing it to us, because it, you know, as I alluded to earlier, you know, these technology, I'm just saying the obvious, right? Technology is mission critical for strategic execution, right? And if you're not thinking about it that way, then you run some serious risks. So I'm interested in how you think of the coming work to evaluate and improve the connector's internal systems in light of how they interact with vendor systems, right? And I think Dimitri alluded to this in his comments. I think you touched on it a little bit, but I'm hoping you can expand a little bit more here. It seems to me, again, deferred maintenance, resource constraints, you can kind of fall behind on things. And among other risks, you run the risk of being incapable of working effectively with your vendors, whether they be IT vendors or any other vendor that that has a core kind of IT capability. So can you just talk a little bit about how you think of that dependency of working with vendors in light of what the work that's to come?
And if I could expand that, I'll say vendors and partners, because a lot of our platforms are also shared within the state and with other areas. So, and I'll touch a little bit on what Dimitri was saying too, about how do you prioritize and categorize the work, right? So if I look at it, when we look at what we're gonna tackle, it's really a balance of managing and understanding risk and what capabilities you're going to meet, right? On both the internal and external side. So first and foremost, it's gonna be a risk-based approach. It has to be, right? And that could be, I'm a big fan of risk, and you need to be able to want to see these areas, and it's really an organizational desire to see the risk and not run from it. And I'll reason to speak about a risk-based approach here. So when we look at our partner systems, our vendor systems, I'm looking at it from a risk perspective. Like, what are the risks if the vendor, I mean, we talked earlier about a third-party risk. If there's a breach or something on those systems, how could it negatively impact us? What information do we have in those systems and protecting that accordingly? What if the vendor has financial concerns and is unable to maintain itself? There's partner risk, and I say risk differently with partners, but making sure that we're all going the same direction and that we're all meeting the right needs, and the connector continues to fulfill its mission without, I would say, losing its focus with these shared platforms. So, I mean, there's so much to do, and if vendors are part of it, I would say that we need our vendors. We need working. We're so small that we need our vendors and partners. We just need to make sure that we're looking at it clearly. And Dimitri was talking about going from vendor to vendor, you lose control, right? And so building those controls in, and that includes, we talked about data governance. That's understanding where the information is and how to protect it and understand it, and how to recoup it, if you would, when we're moving from platform to platform. Testing your backups, reducing risk. So if a vendor has a challenge or our internal areas have challenges, that we can recover. There's myriad ways of looking at how we work with our vendors, partners. I look at them as keys to our success, but we just have to look at it, and we have to speak the risks with them, right? And have these clear discussions. So
thank you. Sure. Godspeed, as someone said.
Thank you all. Appreciate it. Thank you.
And the final item
David, can I ask you to hand me that keyboard?
Absolutely. is something Audrey is very excited about. So if you're going to a happy place, because it's been like 90 minutes, snap out of it, pay attention. This is really important to the executive director.
Very important, executive director. Oh, am I having my experience in the lag myself? Maybe.
Yours is
The
long.
mouse is moving.
Okay, that seems good. Okay, all right, here we go. I realize it makes it look like this child and this doctor are doing our scenario planning, but maybe that's me. So, which is maybe fun. So as I noted before introducing David's great presentation, I appreciate that you all share the same level of curiosity and support for that kind of thinking at the connector. And I am glad I bet right. I knew you all would find that to be a really energizing conversation and topic for us to explore together, and to sort of preview as a continued direction we are really moving in as an organization, moving out of a space where sometimes it can candidly feel like we're treading water and moving from day to day at the connector, but really thinking about what is the future we're trying to build the connector towards, right? And walk towards, and where is it we're going? So technology is a huge component of that, really like the spine of the way we deliver so much to the public and support one another in our work. Zooming out a little bit, another topic I wanted to introduce to the board, and I will preface this presentation on scenario planning as a structured exercise that we're going to start undertaking at the connector, This is a very early preview to give you a sense that we're directionally standing up this new kind of thinking at the connector. It's not reporting out to you, here are all the scenarios we've identified, or here's what we've determined about them, but really to start to acclimate you all to the fact that we're doing this. And, you know, very similar themes to what you shared, what you heard from David, trying to think about how we prepare ourselves as an organization for a dynamic and evolving environment. On the technology front, that's itself very multifaceted. So it's the great questions about AI and new tools that are coming online, developments with bad actors out there that are becoming more sophisticated in terms of breaching systems, et cetera, things we have to be thinking about as we manage our landscape, vendor dynamics, data governance, and the rest. But applying that same sense of understanding, we live in a world full of risks and uncertainty, and yet have to make decisions day to day about how we move forward. We have started thinking about how we stand up a fuller risk management approach at the Health Connector that has a much more unified point of view about the way organizationally we respond to the existence of risk, not the ifs about risk. Risk does exist. We live in a world where we walk out the door every day as individuals. We operate as an organization and environment where there are a number of different risks and varying scenarios in the future that could very much affect course for the Health Connector in terms of how we're supporting the public, changes in the economy, policy changes, political changes. There's a very, very multidimensional environment that we operate in that to make the soundest decisions today, we need to have a very sophisticated understanding of. And so as we're thinking about organizationally how we frankly mature ourselves to have a more robust and organized way of understanding those different scenarios, scenario planning emerged as an exercise that there's frankly a really wonderful kind of body of research out in the world around. I'm sure folks in the room know, and we very much welcome your thoughts and maybe experience you've had doing scenario planning. It's often associated with private sector industries that think about scenario planning from a competitive advantage perspective, trying to understand what else is happening in the market around it. But in public sector agencies and nonprofits, it can be just as valuable, if not more, although with a different set of considerations. And we feel like this is an important time for the connector to start to undertake it in a particular way in deepening our situational awareness of the opportunities and risks that surround us. And again, this is really in service of reverse engineering. How do we make the most no regret moves today about how we organize and resource ourselves to make sure that we're ready for a multitude of possibilities in the future, exogenous events that could occur that would affect course for the Health Connector. Okay. So why scenario planning? And please jump in anywhere with questions. And what do we mean by it when we talk about it? So as I said, whether you're talking about a for-profit, private sector industry, thinking about it in terms of competitive advantage, or an organization like us that provides essential services to the public, all scenario planning really is a strategic iterative process for envisioning multiple non-zero chance events that could occur in the future so that you are not organizationally surprised if and when they do occur, and to enable you to start from at least a few steps ahead in terms of enhancing your ability to make decisions in the event that those occur. I will note, as we're endeavoring into this space, we'll be thinking about what are the scenarios we want to have at least some kind of a basic plan on a shelf waiting if those things are to occur. That's a value in its own right so that we're not caught flat-footed by anything that could be coming down the road. And we'll give some examples of what's on our mind as we think about that. There's also organizational value in developing the muscle around envisioning uncertainty. And David made a point earlier that I want to emphasize, not fearing risk, understanding it is there, and to be able to approach it with more confidence and to sort of build a DNA around agility into the way our organization thinks will be important, because we could think of 25 scenarios that we think we want to be prepared for, but it could be the 26th. And how do we make sure we have an organization that's ready for the 26th? Okay. So what is this really for us? So what for and why now? I think some of it is sort of self-evident, but it's really intended to improve our ability to make the most strategic possible decisions now as an organization. making our organization more resilient and confident and prepared for a future that we know we cannot necessarily write ourselves. What are the no regret moves we could make now that make sense regardless of what might happen across a number of different dimensions? Risk-based really matters here, right? Because we do think a lot about risks that could destabilize us or interfere with our delivery of services or our health as an organization. There's also scenario planning for opportunities and wanting to make sure you're ready to strike if the stars align and there's opportunities to really move the ball forward in terms of mission and really what we're here to do. We have to be really thoughtful about our resource allocation. We don't have every resource in the world. We're a lean team. We're working in an environment where everybody across government and the healthcare sector is being asked to do more with less. So how do we make sure we're making the smartest, most efficient decisions possible about the way we allocate resources? We want to move our organization from being reactive to proactive as best as we possibly can. Help our staff start to get more prepared to think about long-term thinking generally, and make sure as an organization we're on the same page about how we see the future and the multiple possibilities that could await us. Why this particular moment? This could be an important exercise at any point for any organization that's high stakes, of course. This has not been historically done at the Connector. We do think like this, I want to assure you. It's not as though we don't, across all of our different teams and disciplines, think about possibilities in the future, but it has not been in a very structured way. It's more about kind of, well, what if this happened? Oh, that would be bad. And I could imagine it leading to these things, and we should be ready if that happens. But what we're hoping to stand up here is a much more structured, sort of documented, supported process where, again, it results in a different kind of set of muscles for the organization and actual kind of standing ready starter plans in the event of some of these types of scenarios we could envision. I don't have to tell anyone on this board, we're in a moment of uniquely intense volatility, major changes to federal funding that have affected our programs, the people we serve, hundreds of millions of dollars of the subsidies that our programs have depended on just got sucked out of the atmosphere. Incredible effects for our program, our presence in the market, the people we serve. Unfortunately, where we are nationally, we continue to see political volatility around the Affordable Care Act, whether you're thinking about congressional actions or executive actions or the court system and case law that emerges, tight state fiscal environment where we need to be smarter and sharper about every single thing we do. We've discussed in this meeting continued healthcare cost growth that we all recognize is unsustainable and does create implications for our programs, for our policies like the individual mandate, et cetera. We're seeing some volatility, some fragility in our healthcare landscape, whether we're looking at providers or carriers, mergers, market dynamics. There's a lot swirling around us. Demographic changes, when we think about the composition of the Massachusetts public, technology changes we just discussed. We are really doubling down as an organization on how we think about holding ourselves to the highest standards of best business practices. And, as we just talked about the 20-year anniversary, which was a wonderful kind of look back at our creation and our first 2 decades of work. But I think it's important as an organization, we self-identify that we're not a startup anymore. And it's important for us to be building the most sustainable, durable kind of business model, not to say we're static and that's done. The whole point of the Connector and the model we were handed by the Commonwealth was to be able to iterate and grow and import best practices in terms of organizational management and planning. Okay. So approaching this, I mentioned we really are at the very beginning of this thinking. We have done research on best practices across different sectors and industries, but primarily focusing on public sector and nonprofit, just because there's a little bit more of a through line in terms of thinking about the work that the Connector does. We're very fortunate to have close relationships with other state-based marketplaces. And I reached out to 2 other state-based marketplaces that I knew for a fact do scenario planning and have a much more structured approach to risk management than the Connector historically has. So you'll chuckle, but the 2 that I identified that we were briefed by were the California marketplace and the Idaho marketplace. And you can't really imagine more different marketplaces from a size, from a kind of state politics perspective, but they were wonderfully informative. I'll just briefly say California has an incredibly, very well-resourced, lots of staff who work on it, risk management kind of model I will note in California, there's actually a state law that requires state agencies to conduct scenario planning. So it's actually a requirement they have. So they kind of hook into that in a particular way. Idaho's is less formal, but it's just an ongoing process that their leadership team engages in. But it was very helpful to just hear kind of best practices and learnings, and here's how, what we've learned as we've gone along in the process. So we're definitely looking out the window and knowing we're not the first people to walk down this path, and wanting to make sure we're keeping the door open for learnings from other entities that we can get best practices from. So just briefly to give you a sense of, as we're starting this process, our framework is really going to be animated by the question, what are the internal and external forces that could shape the performance, organizational health, and focus of the connector over the next 5 years? We could have picked 2 years or 10 years, but 5 feels like kind of a reasonably significant amount of time, but also kind of within striking, view in terms of our peripheral visibility. And then after doing some thinking with our leadership team, we decided to separate out the 2 major wings of the planning focus, one being more operational, so thinking about kind of technology risks and personnel and operational, ongoing operations, et cetera. So that's a little bit more contingency planning focus. So kind of like, to use Eric's term, what would it be like if somebody broke into our system? How would we be prepared for that? Stress testing, all of the components of our operations that we need to be ready for, any exogenous actions that could affect us that we need to be thinking about, including things like personnel, thinking people retire, people move along. How do we make sure our staff are ready for that and we don't lose vital institutional knowledge, et cetera? So that's more on the operational side, and then a separate set of considerations that we'll organize scenario planning around is more kind of market changes, policy changes, economic forces that could affect the coverage we offer, who's buying it, what the policy landscape, the market landscape looks like in Massachusetts. So I previewed some of this. I won't read every single line here, but sort of bucketing these into technology and operations. I noted personnel. So again, this is really about preparedness across all these dimensions of just how does our organization tick and can carry on in response to various events that could occur. Similarly here on the more strategic side, again, thinking about, we've talked about the immense number of policy changes, funding changes that could come our way, case law developments, regulatory frameworks as they shift and evolve at the federal level or state level, looking at the state fiscal picture, the possibility of future economic downturns. How does that change who comes to the connector for coverage? How might that change the risk pool and spending changes when we think about connector care? The broader market environment, which again, we've talked about. We continue to be a state that's exceeding the benchmark that we set for ourselves in terms of cost growth and premium growth. What happens to the connector care program budget? What happens to our enrollment? What happens to our administrative fees if that we use to finance our operating budget? If costs are not contained and more people start to dip out of the market, and that has implications for the risk pool and Commissioner Caljo's world. How do we think about those kinds of alternate futures where cost is contained, is a little bit contained, is a lot contained, enrollment shifts for us in terms of thinking about our footprint, and again, changes in the carrier and provider landscape, which it feels like we're seeing more and more of each year. So that's what we've identified in terms of where we want to go. I noted that we're thinking about scenario planning as an incredibly worthwhile exercise for us organizationally, as frankly good organizational hygiene. Thinking about this as really being the beating heart of our ability to kind of carry ourselves to the highest standards in terms of good governance in a very dynamic landscape where the connector itself exists to fill in a lot of gaps for people as they move through their careers, have different shifts in their own kind of economic and financial circumstances in their life. How are we ready to be agile and nimble and ready and unsurprised for the many things that could occur that might affect course for us? So broader risk management approach that we're working on, scenario planning is a component of that. It's not all of that, and we'll be keeping you posted really on both. We would love to come back to the board as we deepen our thinking of the examples that we identify that feel the most worthwhile I noted, you know, if we come up with 25, I don't know if that will be the right number, but if we come up with 25, we also separately in parallel want to make sure organizationally we're as developed as possible to be ready for the 26th as well. It's not always about the substance, it's also just about the organizational kind of culture, and making sure that staff have the support and confidence they need to meet whatever moment does arrive at our doorstep. So we do plan to work on this over the next couple of quarters, and then hoping to use our end of year strategic meeting with the board to come back with some of the learnings from our first run at this. I imagine we'll keep kind of learning and iterating as we go and figure out the right cadence. We very, very much welcome general input from the board on the endeavor itself, as well as the specifics. Please look at this Health Connector. I'm really worried about, or I could really anticipate X or Y or Z. We'll give this our best shot, but we really depend on the board's guidance and input and insights about what else might be brewing out there that we might not identify in our first run at this. And we're looking forward to learning. This is going to be new for us, but hoping that it does, again, engender us with a readiness for a dynamic future. And this feels like the right moment for the connector to do this, given how much we're doubling down on making sure we're the best possible marketplace and public service entity that we can possibly be. So I will pause there. Very much welcome all thoughts, all questions, big picture, small picture, all of the above.
Director Gasteyer, I think this is a really important set of tasks to execute on. My personal experience with similar exercises over 20 years has shown that there can be real benefits from a well-formed set of targeted scenario planning. We at the Division of Insurance underwent 18 months ago, we underwent a similar exercise. And it really sort of drew us into some areas of focus that have already yielded some really important advances in all lines of insurance. A couple of observations. The connector muscle, I think you sort of referred to this, but I think the connector muscle here is already pretty strong, sort of almost ingrained in the work that you do, because we have been in Massachusetts living in an environment of potential but constant systemic change for over a decade now. It's amazing. It's built up with constant churn and threats and exercises of planning and contingencies. And I think of all the groups I've ever worked with, the connector has executed on that constant churn amazingly well and amazingly steadily with stakeholders. And that's a tribute really to you, Madam Director. This work will also, I think, be beneficial because it will align your senior team as well as the board to the tasks and hard decisions ahead. And I think it's incredibly helpful that we iterate back and forth over time. It works well when the participants do their homework ahead of time. And so that's incredibly important. It'll be incredibly time consuming. So this is sort of a thank you to all of us and to the staff, because this is not an easy exercise. It could be a check the box exercise, but that's not what we're trying to do here. We're really trying to do some scenario planning. And so buckle up, folks. I think we've got some really important work to do, but you could not have more support from me for this effort. I appreciate that.
Is there a hand here? Yeah, back up.
Thank you. This seems incredibly important and timely. I'm curious if, like, how you envision connector enrollees being part of this process, and sort of involving the people who are impacted, and if you see a role in terms of focus groups, or I'm not sure, or how the connector board has done that in the past. So this seems like an incredibly important process, and just making sure that the conversations that are happening among staff are also sort of taking into account, like, the real people are bouncing ideas off of the real people who are
It's a great question. I will say I had not contemplated a formal role for enrollees in this because it's so kind of inward looking in terms of the organization's design, I guess I would say. That being said, without question, the scenarios we identify and how we think about the implications will 100% be informed by what we understand about the people we cover, their experiences, the market. We look constantly at information from our members, surveys, what they're saying when they interact with our navigators, our call centers. All that input informs how we understand how they react to everything that happens with the connector. And so I think that would inherently be baked into the way we think about if XYZ happened, what would we imagine? The response would be that we would then need to support in terms of our outreach. I'm making that up as an example. But we can give that more thought if there's a particular role there. I think one piece I would just want to balance with is some of the scenarios we might want to think about. I would not want to alarm members about in terms of saying if the connect, I'm hesitant to even say it in a public meeting, but like if XYZ event were to occur, how would it affect you if it were something that could introduce a worry about our stability in some way, when the exercise is, of course, to try to make us more stable. But our experience is you do need to be very cautious in the way you talk to your public about a world of risk. I see that as more our job to manage than sort of dragging enrollees into those worries. I think that. But
I still would love for us to think.
Yeah,
about
I'm very
how
open
we're
to it.
doing.
Very open to it. Sure.
This definitely makes a ton of sense to me, especially given that it feels like we're living through a scenario in the so somewhat living it real time and doing the planning. And I'm curious, given that, are there other kind of top items that keep you up at night that you're thinking of as you go into this?
Yeah. Well, I would definitely say David's world, not to personalize it to him, but certainly, technology security, as we've all discussed and identified, is just, an evolving area. And I think we've all, whether it's things that made it into the paper or didn't know enough about how that can bring an organization to its knees very rapidly. So just that is a huge priority in an area that we, have a lot of controls in place around, but would think about as a place we would want to deepen our scenario planning around. The continued policy changes and volatility we see from DC is profound. It's, even what has already happened is significant enough, but the volatility, the erraticness, the hyper kind of personalization and politicization of policymaking, including towards specific states that the federal government has particular attitudes towards, worry about how that could shake out in terms of program operations and policy that would be very much coming home to roost for us if things went a particular way. I would say those come to mind in a big way, as well as if the state is not able to bend the cost curve. I think, we are very fortunate to have a lot of tools to buffer certain people from the impacts of that, but not everybody, as we discussed earlier. And I worry about an atomization and a fracturing of who in Massachusetts really feels like health reform and the state has their back, and that they're really able to thrive in Massachusetts and continue to access the healthcare they need and deserve in a way that's not financially, untenable. So those come to mind for me as the biggest tranches of focus. And then other pieces feel more standard for any responsible organization from a good organizational hygiene perspective, succession planning and that type of thing. But those first ones are the biggies for me at least.
Matt and then
Yeah.
Michael.
I'll be very brief with a suggestion that I'm sure you're already contemplating, and it's actually aligned with some of the things that you just said. So the items that keep you up at night implies that there needs to be as part of this process, very thoughtful prioritization, right? Because the list of scenarios is endless. And whether it's 25 and you're worried about 26, I think even within the 25 or the 10 or the 5, making sure that you prioritize those. There's a reason that this sort of activity is not done as thoughtfully and intentionally as you're laying out here. It's definitely the right way to go. And it's because we're not often resourced in the same way, right, as those who do this more commonly. So really calls for an explicit focus on those things that represent the highest risk. At some point, there's diminishing returns, right? So I would just offer that as my first reaction to this as an important element.
Michael Demansky.
So my overarching comment here is generally that's not how we can help. But my specific comment related to what Matt just said is in doing that prioritization, understanding the probabilities of varying things matters a ton. And so understanding how you're assessing what those probabilities are, I think is important. I think it's my personal view, just the probability that healthcare spending in Massachusetts will continue to rise faster when we come to Massachusetts, probably a good bet.
We got a working group, Michael, don't you worry.
Yeah, no. That's not fair. The probability that the federal environment will be unstable is probably very high, but I think more importantly, the probability that the federal budget deficit will put pressure on support we get from the feds is also really, really high. And so those are the types of triggers for scenarios that I would prioritize before I would worry, and maybe this wrong, before I would worry that a vendor is gonna, I mean, I do think you have to worry just as operationally, vendors are gonna make huge mistakes. You know, that's not a good
Because
thing.
that's never happened.
Yeah, right, but I guess that's at a lower level type of, I mean, again,
Isn't it like the criticality also? The probability of something happening, so it might be low
Right.
probability, but if it happens,
Okay.
we're in big trouble.
There's a matrix there.
And so I guess this discussion, which we're not gonna have now because it's 2 till 12, is actually the key point. So my original point was how we can help. I think thinking through some combination of how you prioritize the probability of things to criticality, what we can help with, which is, protecting and security of data breaches is a must-do thing. I think just let us know, because like Michael, I'm really supporting this exercise. I think it's essential, always, and particularly in the comment environment.
Did you just refer to yourself in the third person?
Yes, I know. Like,
Professors at Harvard do that.
everyone else gets their first names, and Michael and I have to have our last name. And I blame our parents.
Thank you. So I completely agree on the importance of this. I would encourage you to really build in explicitly getting outside perspectives. It's great that you've looked at other, but like really outside. Because I think we've been doing a lot of this also with, organization has been. You can really not see what big risks are if you talk just to yourself. I anticipate, for example, if 7 or 8 years ago, and planning had been done, the global pandemic would probably have been really high. And yet, as I look at the risks, which over the last 5 years or 6 years have been completely consequential, global pandemic in the last 18 months. And so when we've done this at my school, we had none of the risks on our none of them. We're like, the system goes down. We have an active shooter. We don't. And everything that has completely changed our landscape would not have been on the list, which brings me to the last point, which is, I think, and you alluded to this as part of this, knowing that you're going to miss huge things. And developing capacity and process and mobilization. What do you do when you wake up in the morning and you have the global pandemic, which was not on your, how do you very quickly act?
Right, exactly. Okay, thank you. I think that's an even better articulation of what I was alluding to in the 26th scenario. But I appreciate that very much.
I think we're at time, so 30 seconds.
30 seconds, just to pick up where Nancy left off. The external perspective, I think, is extremely important. I also think looking at other verticals is extremely important in terms of risk metric as it relates to other verticals versus just looking at it from connector and other similar organizations.
And can I say, I think the external perspective actually ties into what Becca was saying, because often our understanding isn't the understanding important constituencies have, or the decisions we make are often not the ones they would want us to make if we actually talk to them and brought them into it. And we've been learning that with students all year, like, oh, we think we know what the students want, and then we're always wrong. Very much appreciate that.
And we don't want to be Canva in the news.
And we don't want what?
We don't want to be Canva in the news or schoolhouse.
Right.
or-
That's right, yeah.
That's right.
Thank you, yeah.
Kiwi, you got us this excited.
Thank you for doing my level.
My last comment would really be to echo Becca's, in the sense that I think that in general, since joining government, I really think that one of the fundamental problems we haven't really resolved in decision-making is how do we meaningfully engage as institutions that have vast impacts upon tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people? Like, what does it mean to have meaningful engagement? What does it mean to have community engagement? I think we're really struggling with that, so I think it's really worth keeping in mind.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for presentation. Thank you to the team. Where you can see that people are engaged today. And so could I entertain a motion to return?
So moved.
Thank you.
We have to vote.
You have to vote?
Vote.
Good to vote, Ted.
Adjourning?
Run out.
Calls that.
Mike Caldow.
Yes.
Cherno.
Yes.
Okay. Bella.
Yes.
Thank you. Eric.
Yes.
Katia.
Yes.
Rebecca. Yes. Robin.
Yes.
Dimitri.
Yes.
Secretary.
Yes.
Nancy.
Yes.
Matt.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Goodbye.